Thank you, Wendy. Good evening, everybody. I'm Ralph Raybach, First Vice President and Executive Committee member of the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center. On behalf of our CEO, Susan Abrams, the Board of Directors, staff, and volunteers, I'm honored to welcome each of you to today's program. The mission of our museum is expressed in our founding principle: remember the past and transform the future. The museum is dedicated to preserving the legacy of the Holocaust by honoring the memories of those who were lost and by teaching universal lessons that combat hatred, prejudice, and indifference. Today, our program is Jewish Genealogy, Old Myths, and New Science, DNA. We will shed a light on investigating our own past. We would like, hear your phone. I'm sorry, everybody. We will shed light on investigating our own past. We would like to thank our community partners who were listed on the screen prior to the start of the program. Jewish genealogy is an evolving pursuit to discover who we are and where we came from. A common misconception is that Jewish genealogy is an impossible task, but this presentation will dispel those myths and show you how you can pursue your own family history. The program, hosted by our Heritage Committee, will include an overview of innovative science of how DNA testing has brought a new light to Holocaust research and searching for relatives. Mike Karsen, member of the Association of Professional Genealogists, the Genealogical Speakers Guild, and former president of the Jewish Genealogical Society of Illinois, will discuss these exciting new findings. I must say parenthetically that I started my family tree, which goes back to the 1700s, when my father gave me all the information of his family way back in 1949. Mike is the author of JewishGen website, Guide of Jewish Genealogy in Chicagoland, and has published articles on genealogy. So many thanks to Mike for doing this for us. We have hundreds of people attending the program today from around the nation and even the globe. We will have time for a short audience Q&A at the end of the program. We will do our best to get in as many questions as possible. Welcome, Mike.
Well, good evening, everyone. And depending on where you are in the world, it could be very late. Again, Ralph, thank you for the nice introduction, and thank Wendy and Matt of the Holocaust Museum for making this whole process start. And I'm not going to really say much more. It's just that it's an honor to be here, and I have a two-part talk, and I'm going to start sharing my screen now, if we can do that properly. Okay, so here's the introduction and what Ralph said. I'm going to talk about the old myths and new science, and I'm also going to give a little bit brief touch on Holocaust research. It's, that would be probably 5 lectures to do it good, but I thought it would be good for you to get some information on it. All of my links will be in the handout, which will become available to you in the next day or so. And if you're really urgent, you could email me, tonight, and I'd send it to you. But what I'm going to do is cover, let's see here. Okay, so we always have to start with something a little light, and in the Jewish tradition, having something to eat. So when I first started my genealogy, of course, I went to a Chinese restaurant. The one thing someone told me is save everything you find on the family because you never know what it is. So I found this fortune. It said a family endeavor will be a highlight. And for me, this family history, I kind of was able to retire and travel a little bit. And I've met over 300 relatives, most of them around the world, as far as Perth, Australia, Europe, Geneva, Switzerland, and in a lot of places I didn't expect to find them, and also in the United States. So most of these people I didn't even know existed before I started this. So it became a whole part of my life that took over. So again, what I'm going to do basically three parts. First, the old myths, the new science, and then a little touch on Holocaust research. Some of you have done some of you may want to look at it again because these sites and everything are constantly being updated, and you'll never know what you find the next day. Okay, so Ralph gave the introduction, and I don't need any more. I will have a little pitch for those of you either near or far. Now with the virtual world we're in, we have genealogy members, all over the world. So I'll give a little pitch at the end for the local Jewish Genealogical Society, which meets on good days in the old times in Northbrook. Okay, so what are the old myths? And again, I'm going to touch on each one of these. And the first one, the most prevalent one, is my family name was changed at Ellis Island. No one else is left who knows anything about my family. All the records were destroyed in the Holocaust for us Jews. And the last one, luckily our family wasn't impacted by the Holocaust. So some of us Ashkenazi Jews who came from Eastern Europe came much later. Okay, so this is what they call the Pale of Settlement. And actually I can use my little mouse here as a pointer. And the important thing about this is where most of the Eastern European Jews came from. They were decreed that they had to live in this zone, and this is Poland. This is Lithuania, Latvia up here. This is Belarus, and down here you come to Ukraine. So these are the places, and the important thing about these places, these are called Gubernias. And it's like a state, so it's like the state of Illinois. About the size, you have to know where your family came from in those places. Don't worry about the country because the country changed every few years, and the famous story that goes around, if you've ever been to a genealogy talk, said, when I grew up, we lived in 4 different countries, but we never moved from the same house. So that was kind of the feeling of it, was that it changed. When you start doing your genealogy, don't worry so much about the country, worry about the district, the state, the Gubernia, whether you're from Minsk, Gubernia or not. Okay, so this is what I'm talking about, our names changed. And this is a ticket. This isn't necessarily a Jewish person, but this is a ticket I found in a package of information. And what happened when they were coming from Europe, this steamship companies, it was a big business for them to get all these people shipped over here, third class, with 2,500 people on the ship. So they would go to the towns, and this Afansina, Plis, he purchased his ticket March 16th in his hometown, paid for it there. You can see his name is down here, just the way they spelled it then. And the people who went to these towns, they knew the language. There wasn't Americans going there. You can't sell to somebody if you don't speak their language. But that was 2 weeks before their departure. So this is the first document that's created. Then this is the ship manifest. Now, I would normally say, if I could get a reaction, can everyone read that, and raise your hands. Well, you can't read that, so I'm going to blow this up. But this is the section over here, if I get my mouse going, that's kind of crossed out. That's my family. And if you blow it up, again, this document was created in France, in Le Havre, France, in 1902 when they were getting on the ship. And they wrote down their names. And this is Frida Blumenfeld, Moishi, Schloime, Etel. Of course, when our ancestors got on the ships, they didn't have their good American names, Fanny, Morris, Sam, and Esther. They had their Yiddish names. So that was what they had. And this is written again, document came with them. And this is today in the National Archives. This is another card. This is my uncle, Schloime, Pekarsky. If you wonder why Karsen doesn't sound like quite a Jewish name, it used to be Pekarsky. You can see we can cut off the front here and the back here a little bit and make Karsen out of it. But this was written when he was departing from Rotterdam, Netherlands, 26 July, 1914. And then he arrived August 3rd, 1914 in New York. But again, his record was written there. It wasn't up to the immigrant people in Ellis Island to give them names when they came through, whatever they mumbled. So that's, and there's no documents that ever prove that. Now the people changed their names once they had to get a job. They thought maybe Pekarsky wasn't a great name. It sounded like, you know, an immigrant, a foreigner. They would change their names in the next few years, but they didn't do it at Ellis Island. Okay, so no one is alive that knows anything. What we have to do, and it's a little hard sometimes, is you have to talk to your family. And I know we don't usually do that, but you know, texting won't work in this. So you have to call someone, and you have to call your cousin, Susie, and say, you know, how are you? And don't worry that you haven't talked to Susie for 5 years. She hasn't called you either. And just see what she knows about the family. And even if she's not the oldest, her mother may have told her some things. Who has the photos from the family? You have to turn into a detective and ask a lot of questions because there's stuff out there, but you have to find it because when people died, they left things. So there is my great-grandfather. I never had a picture of him. No one in my family had a picture of Shlomo Pekarsky, okay? But I visited a second cousin, Millie, in Florida. I never knew her before I started this journey. We were on vacation. Why are you spending your time going to Millie's house, looking under the bed at her mother's album? Well, because her mother had Dad's father, a picture of my great-grandfather. So that's part of the journey. Millie was a very nice person, but when I called her, she said she didn't have anything. But I said, you know, I'm going to come over and pull that stuff out and we'll see what we can find. Okay, this is another picture of my grandmother. And this is my grandmother, Rose, or Reizl, back in Zhitomir, Ukraine. And, you know, I never knew my grandmother was young. So I'm trying to think of the same thing my grandkids are thinking about me. But that was the youngest picture I ever saw. These are her parents. And these are the 3 sons. This is my father sitting over here. And this is Yizkor Peltzer. He was the president of the Butcher Shul in Zhitomir. So this is things, but my cousin had this hidden away and I had to ask him. And he said, oh yeah, I have that picture. Okay, all the records were lost in the Holocaust, okay? First of all, I'll show you that a lot of records that they had when they came to the United States were saved, and they're saved in the National Archives, the manifests. Records from the 1800s are still there, and I'll give you some examples. The only things that are really lost is the communist era, when they, after 1917, when the communists came into Russia, whatever, those records kind of disappeared. But if you're like a lot of us, you're really looking for things from the 1800s when our grandparents were born and our great-grandparents in Eastern Europe. I'll show you what you can find. First, this is the manifest I showed you, and sometimes they go on to 2 pages. It tells you over here, I know you can't read this, where they're going, where they come from, who's the person in Europe who their last contact with, like my grandmother's father, people's ages. So this alone gives you some tie back to the old country, what I'll call the old country. The other thing is the naturalization papers. Again, wherever they got naturalized, whatever county court, whether it was in Chicago or Philadelphia or whatever, if you can realize where your grandparents or whoever you're looking for lived in their first 5 years in the United States, that's where they got their citizenship. And you can see this is Max Blumenfeld. At this time, whether they changed their names, they would have changed their names again to good American names that you knew them by. And this is the town they're from, Botoșani, Romania. And this is the ship they had. So if you couldn't find the ship record, by finding Max's citizenship file, you again, and this is all in the public domain. It doesn't cost anything. They might cost you for copying, but you need to kind of research that. Okay, so I gave you a second there while I was sipping my tea. This is my grandparents' marriage record between Jews and the Zhitomir Society in 1902. So those of you who can read Yiddish, you would say that's Moshe ben Shlomo. I'll give you a little hint over here. And that's Pekarsky. And he married Reizl, but Yitzchak, he was the butcher shul, Peltzer. So these records exist. I hired somebody who was in Zhitomir, knew his way around, could do the translation. Some people can figure it out themselves, but it's worth investing a few dollars to get an expert to go get that. Okay, this goes back to 1834. This is my late wife's family. And this is like a census record. And there it is, whatever. It's Liba Shimonovich Yankelovich. He was 41. Son is David, and wife Freda, age 38. So it goes all the way back. Again, I had someone dig this out, but you can't say the records don't exist. They're there. They're buried sometimes. They're starting to come out. There's a lot of people working on getting them out. So it's getting easier and easier, but this exists. Okay. Last thing, luckily our family wasn't impacted by the Holocaust. Now, some of us, the first wave came before World War II, a lot of us came. The first wave of immigrants came via Spain and Colonial Times. Then the German Jews came in the 1850s. And then the Eastern Europeans came in big numbers, 1880s to 1920s. So thus, some of us who think my grandparents came before then, and we were safe from Hitler's deeds. But when we did, their whole families come. And a lot of times my grandmother that we showed you there with her parents, the president of the Butcher Shul, they never came. So what happened to them? And what happened to her siblings? So a lot of people got left behind and communications were bad. And whether they found out what their fate was or no one wanted to talk about it, we don't know. So as a little preview, and I'm going to come back to Yad Vashem in the follow-up. I did a search of Yad Vashem. My grandmother was Bertha Blumenfeld. She was born 1879 in Botoșani or Botoșani, if you do it right. This Bertha, same name, born about the same time, same place, murdered. So this Bertha very well could be my grandmother's first cousin, named for the same Bertha or Brona they were named for, and it happened. So, and they never made it out. So we just don't know who we left behind and who didn't make it. My other grandmother I showed you was Peltzer. Here's a Freda Peltzer that I found in Yad Vashem, born again about the same time my grandmother was, from the same town, Ukraine, list of evacuated persons. So I did this for every branch of my family, and in every branch I found somebody from the same town with the same surname who perished in the Holocaust. So, I think the myth that we all escape this is not true. Okay, so that's the myths. But now I'm going to talk about new science, and this DNA work is getting a lot of press because a lot of advertising. This Ancestry is everywhere on TV. But it's an amazing thing, and it can help in a lot of ways. So a lot of us search for our relatives in a scientific way. And there's about 4 main companies every day. There's somebody new coming into the program. but there's over 30 million individuals that have been tested in this system. Ancestry, I say down here, is the largest. So while some of the tools they have aren't the best, if you're looking for people, it's the best place because more people are going on there because they just see it on TV and run to their computer and click on it and spend $60 and get that. And it's very easy. They mail you a kit. You do 3 swabs of your cheek or spit into a tube. And, 6 weeks later, you have a profile of yourself, of where you came from. They always have these sales. So it's kind of a competitive thing. It's Mother's Day, it's Father's Day, it's Groundhog Day. They always look for an excuse. So if you want to do it and you're not totally impulsive, you can wait a week or two and you get it for maybe closer to $60 than $100. Now there's 3 types of tests. And again, this is something I can't explain the whole thing to you. Again, it could be a week-long seminar on DNA, but there's basically 3 different tests. One is called yDNA, and that's passed down. There's a Y chromosome that's passed down exactly from father to son to son to son to son. So you can go up your whole paternal line and match people. Then there's this autosomal, which is the most popular one, and that comes from both parents. And then there's a similar one, mtDNA, which is only passed by females to their children. The problem with that is there's very few mutations. So if you do a test like that, you could match 10,000 people. So it doesn't give you really much insight into finding, oh, this person must be related because they match my DNA. And I'm going to show you little examples of the first 2. So this is the first result you get, and a lot of people are excited about this. They get their ethnicity, and each company has a different formula, a different sample of people they do, but basically Ancestry says I'm 100% European Jewish, and they give you some more details and a little map. And this family tree DNA says I'm 98% from the Jewish diaspora. So they have slightly different terms, but this people usually find out what they think. Sometimes there's surprises here. I'll talk about that later. So you have to go into this with a little fear that you might find out something you didn't want to know about your heritage. So I did this yDNA test back maybe 8 years ago. And again, this is supposed to match my father. So my father was Karsen, but he's really Pekarsky. So I'm looking for people with names like Pekarsky because it's my father's father's father. So I matched someone called John Christopher Kane. So on first blush, it says, doesn't sound so Jewish, doesn't sound like Pekarsky. How could this fellow match me? So immediately I contact him by email. There's a process to do that. He tells me his father was adopted. Actually, his father was abandoned by his family in 1927 by his birth family and left in an office building in Manhattan on the 2nd floor. And he was about 2 years old. They say this little 2-year-old boy was turned over to the Children's Society. They put in the newspaper, does anyone know anything about this child? Now, he was almost 2 years old, so somebody must have known something, but maybe they came from out of state and just put him there. So meanwhile, Gordon grew up in a non-Jewish home. That's how he looked as an adult. And he had no way of finding anything about his heritage because there were no adoption records. There's nothing, But come along the DNA, his son put his DNA into the pool and he matches me. So could he be my cousin? Maybe. Sure looks Jewish for those of you. Excuse me. So what happens when you get your results? And this is back to the science. You get the genetic distance here. And here's Richard Parker, who's one of my Pekarsky cousins. He matches me exactly. This John Christopher Kane didn't match me exactly, but was close. So somewhere maybe 6-8 generations back, we have the same great-great-great-grandfather, but we haven't been able to figure out who that is yet. The autosomal DNA is the most popular one. And again, as we go back in time, if you get the basics of DNA, you inherit 50% from each parent. If you go back to your grandparents, you get 25% from each of those four people. And you go back the next generation, it's less and less. So this is good to back to about, we would say about the 1820s to your great-great-grandparents. And then it gets so diluted that it's hard to find, okay? So this is what the test results look like on Ancestry, or on this family tree DNA, actually. And this is my sister, okay? I hope she's watching here, so she knows that she's really related, because it says she's a full sibling, and she has a lot of shared DNA that's a centimorgans. So she's definitely my sister. Jim is my first cousin. I had him tested. It comes through exactly right. Howard is my second cousin. Now, Frida Ann, she's my cousin somehow, but we don't know how, okay? And that's what happens sometimes in this for various reasons. Sometimes people don't know their heritage. Sometimes people don't answer. Sometimes there's something that happened that we don't know about. And I'll talk about non-paternal events and whatever, where you can't figure out why that person is your second or third cousin, even though, you know, I've done enough genealogy to know who my cousins are. So about 2 years ago, I get this email via Ancestry. It says, hello from a DNA relative. Yeah, hi, I think you're related to me. So this is what can happen. And Lynn writes to me, and I won't give you all the details, but she tested her mother, who was in her 90s, and she come up a match with me. So how are we related? Well, her mother was Ruth Moskowitz, and we had a pretty good match. They said we're third or fourth cousins, and it's 172 centimorgans. So that looks good. So then we start comparing notes. What do we know about each of our families? So Lynn's family tree showed that I blacked this out because this was done later with the answers in it. Shlomo Marcus was Ruth's grandfather, and he was from Romania. And I have family, the Markovitzes, who also became Marcuses and were from Romania. So to do the DNA, it requires two things usually. You have to do your own homework, because otherwise, if I hadn't done my genealogy, and I'll show you the next one, this is my genealogy. And this Frida Markowitz is my great-grandmother. So that's how we might be related. But of course, I had to do all this work to try and document it. So when Lynn wrote to me, we could have something to compare. So Marcus could be from Markovitz. And I'm going to jump to the end. I don't want to give you all the details, but we had to find ship manifests and a few other records. And then I found they predicted she was my second to third cousin. She turns out to be my second cousin once removed, which is right in there. And this is Ruth, and that's her daughter. And the truth of the thing is that if she hadn't been able to test her mother, we probably would have never matched, because her mother was one generation ahead and shared more DNA with me. So, and this is Lynn and their whole family. The kids there look like they're normal teenagers. Okay, so now, every time someone says, I want to do my DNA, I say, well, time out, be careful, because there's things that the DNA doesn't lie about. And you can find non-paternal events. I know somebody who did a DNA test, and someone came back as his daughter. So he had a little event with the lady in the office, and 40 years later, he does his DNA test, and voila, there she is. So things he never knew about. Hidden adoptions. Of course, a lot of people use DNA testing to find their birth parents. So that's another great thing. And I got an email from a lady about a year ago saying, I just, somehow you're related to me. I just talked to my mother, a year ago. I did my DNA test, and my DNA test came back that I was half Jewish and half Christian or Irish. And she said, that was like a shock. So that's that first test where they get the percentages. She thought she was not Jewish, but there her DNA said she was 50% Jewish. Well, her mother fessed up that, oh yeah, I went to the sperm bank. Dad was having some problems, and in 1967, and you're a product of that chemistry. And this lady also said, and by the way, she's found 4 or 5 other DNA cousins whose mothers did the same thing. So this is a whole new area of anything can happen, name changes. I mean, the other thing, I'm helping one of my cousins do her Holocaust research. And again, the DNA test is trying to help us find people that are somehow related to her that she never knew about. So, so it has some good things, but you might find out something you didn't want to know. And the other thing is you can opt out, but sometimes you get on the list and all of a sudden you get strange emails from people who say they're related, but they might be like 4th cousins. And, if you don't want to be bothered with that, you can opt out, but that's another thing that you get people like me contacting you. So beware. Okay, so the summary here, and we think we're doing okay, is, do not believe the myths. I'm in the Genealogy Society, and we get people that come to us and say, I'd like to do it, but my parents didn't leave me any documents or nothing. And I say, well, the documents are out there. You have to find them. And DNA testing is a whole new dimension to balance. And the genealogy, can be very rewarding. I've met all these people. It was a whole new world for me. And then I'll put a pitch that we have the local society and we're always there to help. So even if you're not local, especially we specialize in Chicago genealogy, so in Illinois. So if you want to email me or write down jgsi.org and mention my name, I'd like to see people come. So, okay, so now I'm going to move on. I finished the old myths, and now we're going to do a little touch on Holocaust research. I gave you a little preview before. So there's a lot of resources out there now, and I put Yad Vashem on the top of my list because I think they've been at this for a long time and have tremendous resource. And I'll go through each of these briefly. Again, once you get the handout, if you're looking for the links, or you can just Google any of these things and they'll come up pretty easy. So this is Yad Vashem in Israel, and they have 7.5 million records. It's a lot, covering 4.8 million different individuals, okay, unique individuals, 217 million pages of documents, and about 500,000 photos. So this is a real repository of information, and they have this huge website with all kinds of resources. So I'm just going to give you a little touch of what you can do, kind of show you a little bit how I did that research before. Here are their digital collections for those of you who aren't going to Israel. Everything, of course, is online, not everything, but a lot's online. And this is, again, their digital collections. And we're going to talk mostly about the Showa Names database. That's the one I searched before. And it includes a lot of different things, records about people who we know were murdered through various sources, mostly pages of testimony that their family or friends recorded with Yad Vashem afterwards. Records that show that person was a victim. They don't necessarily know what their final fate was, but they were in the process, in the Germans' process of whatever, and people who were part of the evacuation by the Soviets. And that's the big, broad, general class of people. If you click on that link, And I did a little case study here. Actually, this isn't anyone in my family, but it was just turned out to be a good example to show you. So I'm just looking. So say your family is Kahanovitz. I didn't put any first name in, and they're from Rakov in Poland. So I put those two things in, and I got 4 records, 4 hits here: Ethel, Bela, Bila, and Doba. Okay, so I'm going to pick these 2 out. Bela Kahanovitz from Rakov, and she's on the list of persecuted people, and she was murdered. That was her fate. And then Doba Senicki, again from Rakov. She came out of one of the Yizkor books, and again, she was murdered. So what else can we find out about them? Here's Doba, came from the Yizkor book. Okay, so her maiden name was Kahanovitz. So she was born Kahanovitz. She was married to Shabtai, and she was murdered. So begin to get some information on each person. There's a little more information on her, but I'm not going that deep. Here's from one of the pages of testimony about Bela Kahanovitz. So the names, you could say even here, the spellings, don't ever get hung up that your family was Kahanovitz and this is Kahanowitz. It's the same thing. It came from a different language, but the transliterations could have a lot of flexibility. Here you have Bela and Bella. So if you do genealogy, Jewish genealogy especially, don't get hung up on exact names, that the exact spelling Witz or Markovitz or Markowitz. They're all came from the same name. So this record is from a page of testimony that somebody filed, and it gives the father's name, her date of birth, place of birth, spouse's name, date of death. And here's something we're going to look at in more detail. This was submitted by Sonia Kahanovitz, who was Bela's daughter. So she lost her mother, and then she submitted to Yad Vashem after the war what she knew about her mother's fate. And that's a lot of the records that are there. So what I did is saying, well, if I was looking for more family, and maybe their name doesn't necessarily all Kahanovitz, who else did Sonia submit for? Who else did she think was probably a member of her family or someone she knew, but it's mostly members of her family. So we're going to look through the records, searching on Sonia and see who else she put in. And here there's 14 people. I don't show them all here. I want to make it a little readable. But there's Bela, of course, on top. And there's Doba. And then there's 2 more Senickis here. And I don't know who they are. I didn't go deeper. They could be Doba's children, her siblings, cousins. I don't know who they are. But you can get deeper and deeper into this thing as you kind of work your way through it and find a lot of family connections that you wouldn't necessarily know that these people are somehow connected to you. Saxonova, you would never know that, but somehow they're related to Sonia, connected with her. Here's a little more about Doba. If you click on, and this is, I know you can't read it, but this is what the page of testimony looks like if you look in the raw form. And again, it was submitted by Sonia. And it says Doba was born in Rakov to Shalom and Bela. So this is Bela's daughter, which it said before, and she was married to Shabtai. I'm sorry. And they lived in Vilna. So that, and she was murdered. So again, as you kind of fill in all this information, you can go from one document to the other. Now there's the International Tracing Service, which collected millions of documents based on what the Germans collected. And those have been kind of hidden away. Only in the last 5-10 years have they come and been digitized and documented and more accessible than having to go to Arlson to the actually archives yourself and try and look through it. And they have documents on incarceration, labor, and liberated survivors. So this is a whole other wealth of knowledge. If you're really digging into the records, here's what their homepage looks like. And again, when I first started doing genealogy, I wrote to them and then I got an answer in 6 months. So, but now through the magic of the websites and searches, we can do things from home. So again, this is what their website looks like. And I can just type in Kahanovitz and click on the search, include synonyms. And guess what I come up with? Sonia. Now, Sonia was the lady who submitted those records for her mother and her sister. And this is somewhere a registration card. I don't want to go into all the details of all this, of what's in here. But again, there's Sarah, Sonia, her mother was Bella, which we know. And so all of this, as you're a detective, a genealogist, you're putting together information about the family and how these people fit together and whatever else you can find. Okay, you can also submit a request to them to do research. And I'm not sure how long that will take. I've done that a number of times. It's faster now. But if you're an impulsive person like I am, you want to get online and do it, tonight, hopefully. Okay, here's the U.S. Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. And again, this is another huge resource. I know you've had speakers at the Skokie from there. I've attended a number of them. And again, I searched their database, and there's Bela again. Again, you can see it's spelled differently and has a different source. I don't want to go into, don't have time to go into all the details, but there's a lot of things you can find. It's all online, all free. You can do it, tonight. Okay, Yizkor Books. Now, Yizkor Book is another resource that was written about the towns and the people after the Holocaust as a memorial by the survivors. There's biographies, photos, and stories. Over 1,000 of them exist. A lot of them, the Jewish Genealogy website has had projects for years translating them. And so sometimes you can find out great things in there about your family. I found one with my family from Berdichev. So it's very good. Okay, and then you go on JewishGen, which again is the Jewish Genealogy website. And they have, I was looking for Rakov in Poland. It has information about the town there, how many Jews were there back. I know you can't read this, so I'm just trying to give you some other information as you're doing research on JewishGen. And then if you're looking for the Yizkor book, oh, there's a Rakov Belarus. So that's the other trick, it's like Springfield in the United States. There may be more than one Rakov, and says not to be confused, Rakov Poland, which is the one we were talking about. So you have to kind of pause a little bit and say, well, this is Belarus, that was Poland, but could it be the same? No, it's not to be confused. So when you get on these things, you need all your eyes and insights and looking around. JewishGen has a Holocaust database that's searchable, and you just put the name you're searching in here. And I came back with, again, Doba. I was searching Doba, and I found that she was in the ghetto, in the Vilnius ghetto list from 1942. So again, if you're trying to put together a story, understand them, what's going on, there's a lot of information out there. And I guess that's the end. I just looked at my watch, and Matt and Wendy, I think almost on time. So I'm going to stop talking. If there's questions, I can answer them. And again, if you don't have the handout, I'll leave this up on the screen. I don't know if we want to stop sharing yet.
Yep, we
Give
can
me time
go
to
ahead.
write my email if you have any questions about my talk, about me, about the Jewish Genealogy Society, just write to me.
We
Okay.
can go ahead and stop sharing the screen so that we can just have, you and I can have a nice conversation. Thank you so much, Mike. This was fascinating. As a genealogy nerd myself, I found this fascinating, and you actually dispelled some myths for me, thinking, well, we were in the United States before anything bad happened, so we're all safe. And it's making me realize I have to dig a little bit deeper to see where the rest of my family is.
Okay.
First, a quick introduction. My name is Matthew Sackle. I'm the Associate Manager of Education at the Illinois Holocaust Museum, and I am thrilled to be doing the Q&A portion of this program. Several people, I'll ask a fun one first, fun in the sense, what is a good website for searching for family genealogy online in general, or Jewish genealogy? Do you have favorites?
Well, probably the best overall place to start is on Ancestry. And has a lot of US records. And when you're starting, you have to get a base of yourself, your parents, your grandparents. So given you can find the census records, you can find citizenship records, you can find draft records for the war, and that's a good place to get started on to kind of get a baseline so you know something there. And then we go beyond it, there's JewishGen.org, which I mentioned is a very good Jewish genealogy website. They have some records there, but they just have a lot of educational tools about the towns, and a lot of information. So those two would be the best websites. Once you get into it, you'll find there's so many websites that you can get lost today, but those would be the two I would start with.
This question, actually, I was surprised by how many people asked this question. With DNA testing companies, some of them have been compromised by hackers, and data has been taken and used for other purposes. You might have signed up to trace your own genetics, but ended up your medical information may be put into a database. What are your thoughts on DNA testing companies?
Well, they've tried to, allow you to opt out of a lot of their sharing, but as we know today, nothing is secure from the hackers. You won't have a bank account. Okay, so I mean, the other thing that I tell people is their medical records. Guess what? Did you ever go to your doctor or your insurance company? Do they do they have your medical records? Are they free from hackers? So there's a lot of risks. And if you just want to find out whether you're Jewish or not, maybe you don't need to do your DNA if you're scared about it. If you want to get into it, and there's a balance. So
Yeah,
there are risks, and nothing is risk-free today.
One of the interesting questions that has been asked actually more than 5 times was, in searching for Jewish relatives, do you recommend using Mormon databases?
The Mormon databases are good. I wouldn't say they're the best for finding Jewish relatives. Okay. So, they have some information, but you have to use JewishGen and DNA and a combination of things. The Mormons are fine. They're free. But, they don't have that much specific Jewish content. They have some things, and you just have to try everything, because you don't know in the genealogy world where you might find something. So you have to be persistent and try as many places as you can.
So that is a great lead up to this question. I was adopted. I can't trace my genetics. Where do I start?
Oh, you can. Sure, you can. You do a DNA test. And, I have a friend, I helped his son. He did Ancestry DNA, and he found both of his birth parents. His father was deceased, but you do that. And if you have a first cousin who matches your biological parents, it's there. And that's kind of the way around, that example I gave. I didn't match too closely, but he was adopted. They didn't even have any records. But this is a big field now of opening up a lot of doors. First, you find out what your heritage is. If nothing else, you find out whether you're Jewish or not. I mean, some of this stuff is hard. Okay, so there's risks in it. But if you really want to find your parents, I would say the DNA test in as many places as you can. Get your DNA out there, and good things can happen.
One question that I found interesting was someone asked, if I had genetic DNA testing done, I wouldn't find out that I'm Catholic, even though I am, or Protestant. But how can you find out that you're Jewish through DNA testing?
Well, the DNA testing targets you back to groups of people, okay, where you live. So if all the Irish people, your DNA will match people who came from Ireland. Okay, so now the people who came from that place I showed you in the Jewish shtetls were Jewish.
Yes.
The people that came from that area were Jewish. So it kind of infers that you're Jewish because you came from Vilnius or those locations where the Jews lived. So yeah, I had that question from a few people saying, well, Jewish, how can they tell I'm Jewish, but you come from a group of people, they're matching DNA patterns, and our patterns, all come from the same root.
That is, the questions are, I'm amazed by how many questions are coming in. Someone asks, what do you do when you have a last name like Schwartz? Where do you even start?
Well, you start with your grandparents, your parents, and then you go back. It may have not always been Schwartz. So you have to get clues specific, find your parents, where they were born, your grandparents, when they came over, did they have any siblings? You just have to work at it. You can't give up. Yeah, that's another thing that people want to give up, like, okay. But, you have to be careful. If you find, Samuel Schwartz, and that was your grandfather, there could be more than one Samuel Schwartz. So I've seen that happen before, where people kind of concluded that, oh, that Samuel Schwartz must be my Samuel Schwartz, and no, not necessarily. So you need to kind of work hard as a detective.
Yeah. Do you have any recommendations for families who have Arab or Persian Jewish backgrounds?
No, well, there is on JewishGen, there's a Sephardi group, if they're Sephardic. So the other thing on JewishGen, there's interest groups of people who are Romanian, are Ukrainian, are Polish, are Sephardic. And then you kind of get in with that group, and then you ask questions, or there's Sephardic genealogy societies. So you always want to kind of find people that maybe came from the same places you came from, and the same origins. And that's, and JewishGen is a good source to kind of meet those people and ask questions and get involved with those people whose records come from the same place yours do.
Yeah, it's kind of worth it. It's a small investment, but it's definitely worth it. Do you have any idea what is the most common Y chromosome in European Jews?
No, the Y chromosome in detail is, it's my thing, my father and my grandfather. Now there's haplogroups, and I can't get into all those because I'm not really an expert in that field.
Right.
But if you do your testing, then they'll tell you came from the Middle East, or with 10,000 years ago. They'll give you a mapping if that interests you. Some people it's interesting, some people it's not. But if you do the testing, then you can find out some of those things of where your family came from 10,000 years ago.
That is fantastic. And several people have commented and said that they've used Yad Vashem and the Jewish Gen Yizkor project book and found lots of great information there. And thank you so much for recommending those sites that have brought them so much success in their own searches. We have time for one more question that I want to just pose to you here. Is it challenging to get into your genealogy? How far back is it really possible to go?
Well, it depends where your family comes from. So I'm Ashkenazi. I've gone back to about 1760 in my Jewish roots, and the tricky part is that the names, Jews didn't have family names till around 1800. So there aren't, I showed you that record, I think, from 1834. But if you go before that, Jews were only named Moshe ben Pesach, kind of what you're named in your bris and your bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah. And so they didn't have family names. So in Eastern Europe, it's hard to go back further. If you're from Germany, we don't have too many from England that are really Jews that lived there long. But if you're from Germany and other places, you can go back much further, and Sephardi can go back much further. But if you're an Ashkenazi Jew, if you can go back somewhere in the 1700s, you can do more, but you have to be super diligent and spend your lifetime trying to match to find the right family, because you can't search on the family name. It didn't exist.
Well, thank you so much for being a part of our museum programming schedule. It was an absolute pleasure talking with you tonight. I would like to tell everyone here that on tomorrow night at 6:30 p.m., we are going to be doing a book and author program with Christopher Browning, the author of Ordinary Men. The museum is actually open again. We are up to date on all of our safety protocols. We're open Wednesday through Sunday from 10 a.m. till 5 p.m. We invite you to come and visit and to be socially distant and wearing your mask. And on February 18th at 7 o'clock p.m., our brand new exhibit for our Mandela temporary exhibition in regard to Nelson Mandela is opening at 7 o'clock p.m. It's going to be an amazing celebration where we will be having singers from South Africa and the curator and journalists who dealt with Nelson Mandela, who will be speaking in a panel. Thank you again, everybody, so much for coming tonight. And again, thank you to Mike for sharing his knowledge with us. I hope everybody has a wonderful night, and to make sure you fill out the survey that's been dropped into the chat below. We will be sending up follow-up materials that talk about all of the links and resources that he has shared with us this evening. Thank you very much for coming tonight.
All right, thank you all. And if you have more questions, let me know. I might not answer them the first day, but be patient. I'll get to them. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.